have a little latitude, at least maybe revising the 4-year
I've got a pretty good sense of the direction, and I won't be offended. I might have to take some educated guesses, and I won't be offended if you guys pick it apart. But I at least give you something to look at, and that's what a superintendent is.
We extend this conversation.
Got till 4. Got till 4.
Okay. So this is something I think I've talked to the mayor about, and I've talked to Gene about. But somewhere in all of these ordinances and whatever sections they are, there's something that says something to the effect that the city administrator generally supervises.
It's in a couple different places.
It's in most of the individual.
I'm fairly close.
Yeah.
To tell you the truth, I didn't realize that was there. Because I've always struggled with why is there this sometimes question in appointed official staff mind about who they report to. Because in my mind, whoever writes your review is who you report to. That's the simplest way I've ever been able to define.
That's the case on 50%.
Okay, I understand, and that's.
Can I read you mine? I'll give you the exact word. So this is city attorney's. The city attorney is responsible to and held accountable by the mayor and board of aldermen, period. Work is performed under general supervision of the city administrator.
Okay.
That's the
line. Most of them will read pretty much to this.
Yes.
And I may lose this battle. I'm not necessarily going to die on this hill, but I think I need to run up this hill. Okay. That sounds crazy. That means I've got at least 7, if not 8, supervisors.
Yeah.
Okay, that's crazy. Okay. And in my mind, what we do is somehow, I don't know how many things we got to change, but the performance of the appointed officials is the responsibility of the city administrator. It shouldn't be that they report to 6 boards members and the mayor and city administrator. Maybe that's not what everybody else thinks. I know that's kind of that's all that stuff. The company's changing the world. Okay, it feels like changing the world. All right, I can't think of the name right now. It's disruptive. Exactly. That's disruptive. But I can't imagine working in an environment where I thought I might have 8 different supervisors. Yeah, I realize that day to day, that isn't exactly how it goes, and we've all figured out pretty well under some crazy system in my mind. And there's nothing wrong with it that there's 8 people have influence, and I used to have lines that I had 2 or 3 people. I've had dotted these 2, but I had 1 solid line with somebody on a fortune, and I can't imagine having an organization having 8 solid lines to somebody. So that's what that sounds like.
But it doesn't, well, you don't have that many. And the reason you don't, Richard, is that staffer doesn't have 6 board members. Because as an individual board, you don't have no power at all.
Okay. So
As a board, you do. So, and maybe that needs to be said that the board, I don't have it right from me, but it should say the board. The board has some power and needs to be having somewhat authority or some power input or etc. Individuals, no.
Yeah. But that would mean that there are 3 solid lines. The mayor, right?
We narrowed it down.
So yeah, we're down to 3. Anything more than 1 in my mind is basically unacceptable. And so again, I don't know how we go about it, but in my mind, and maybe you're not about this, but we've talked about it. You're not involved in the day-to-day activities necessarily at club. You should have input. I have no concern with that whatsoever. This review being written by the mayor seems odd to me. Seems to me like it should be the city administrator. I'm not picking on you, but the city administrator should write that review, but they should get feedback from the board, and that can be explicitly put in there, but the feedback should be solicited or whatever from the board and the mayor. The mayor's probably got a little more than we do as a board, because he works with them a little closer than we do, okay? But as far as who writes the review and who they're responsible for reporting to for their performance, it seems to me like we should make that more clear.
So would you go one step further and say that you have the input to the city administrator to say blah, 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 good, bad, or different about whole? Then Gina looks at this and says, I've got 4 other ones that just say great, 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 and I got this one that says bad, bad. I'm throwing that one out. I'm not going to bring that up. And that's her. because the way it is kind of now, it's almost mandated that it has to be put in there. And I disagree. I agree more that it should be input, suggestions, not mandated.
That's an easy, that is an easy fix, and there's parts that I agree with Richard, because I'm gonna tell you where it conflicts. Isn't a conflict if everything's going fine.
Yeah.
It's a conflict when, let's say, there may or may not be a disciplinary action that's needed. The appointed officials are excluded from the disciplinary action chain of line of change, where we suggest, you do this, step 1, step 2, step 3. They don't get the privilege of that. And there's nothing explicitly in there where city administrator can discipline. So writing it through the worst case scenario, there are holes, several pieces, and I can point to several situations where it's like, okay, I'm not sure what my authority is. And they also know that, not sure, well, it don't matter, do I need to call board meeting? So I think there's several areas in a line of how you want to organize the work chart and shore up some gaps and get rid of some. It's hard for people to start two masters. So how do you get that line out only with the evaluations, but there are sections that the appointed official are specifically excluded in chapter 125, and one of them is this.
Richard and I've had this conversation before, and it's like even of the appointed official, 50% of the review, and I don't work with Ron every day. I don't city administrator or city attorney every day. I see what they do, talk to Paul, but I don't think I'm worthy for 50% of how they do. Now, what I can, Gene is she'll write the review and I'll look at it. And if I agree with it, I just I agree with the review. I agree with the review. I have yet to disagree with her. And then the city attorney does the city administrator. That's it. Excuse me, the mayor does the city administrator.
Not all the time.
It's too late.
I agree on this 100%. Yeah, definitely the board, definitely the mayor has some input, some percentage of whatever you would do, but I agree.
Yeah, mostly agree. I think that the board should have input, the line should go to the city administrator, the board should have input. City administrator, read our stuff and maybe evaluate it and take that into their interpretation and the mayor, but I think the mayor should have some kind of, maybe just a notes from the mayor in there to where the mayor's actual verbiage is getting into that review.
That is how it currently is, and that doesn't have to change. Right now it says that mine is fully done by the mayor with input from the board, and it's the mayor's discretion on what that input from you all is, what that input, and then the appointed official, the way it's written, is 50-50 with input from the board, and basically I've always left that to the mayor's discretion. So that part can be changed to keep like, hey, the mayor's comments or.
Well, yeah, rather than it being 50-50, he's literally, I'm just saying he is, we have a guy. But I think that weights it a little bit more to the where, a little bit, like the weight of the mayor's interpretation is a little bit more. Since he's the one making the appointee, I just kind of see it that way. But again, this isn't a hell of a diamond either, but I do think that line needs to be going to the city administrator.
I want to go back to the ordinance just for a second, because like Alderman Rucker said, this is how almost all of us are written. If we miss one in one of our cleanups, that's accidental. So as far as reviews and stuff, that's 125. That's different. I do agree with that. I view Gina as my boss. But I think this wording is actually somewhat accurate because it's really the way a lot of the overall governance is worded for the city. Ultimately the mayor and the board are responsible for everything in the city. Mm-hmm. But we appoint the city administrator to be day-to-day generally supervising all of the activity in the building. So I think the phrase, the official is held responsible to and held accountable by the mayor and alderman is accurate because you guys are the ones to remove an appointed official. And so, ultimately, the board and the mayor, I view that as one because we went through this recently. We're talking about how we appoint the votes for all that kind of stuff. But it takes 4 votes up there to remove one of us, and that is the ultimate power. And I think we talked about it when we went through some of these ordinances last year, that we discussed whether the city administrator should be able to fire an elected official. But I think that we decided against that, because if the board can hire and the city administrator can turn around and fire somebody the next day, what good is the power?
Well, you're also pretty conflict there.
Yeah, it's just a touch. So I think this phrasing is fine, perhaps spelling out what general supervision is, but again, I look at the straight line being straight line from me to Gina, and then in the worst case scenario, through Gina to the board, because, I think discipline, I think right, discipline and.
Some changes on the other side of the HR.
Well, yeah, and that is only board level, because you guys picked us, and so you have the authority to tell us.
I guess I'd ask this question. I hear what you're saying, and I don't necessarily disagree, but what I do know is that generally supervises produces a lot of subjectivity. Okay, so what I can, I go back to something I can visualize. I can visualize the city attorney with a direct line to the city administrator and a dotted line to the board and the mayor. Okay, that makes sense to me. I don't know how you put that in an ordinance, but that's what I think. I don't know that everybody else would agree, but I think that's what most people would say is happening. And so we're trying to demonstrate that. Now, we don't need to demonstrate it's okay. But somehow we've got to clean up the subjectivity around what is generally supervised.
So I think I might have an answer, might I may have to brainstorm. So again, I go back to outline that in more detail in chapter 125. Take out some of those exceptions. Other than firing, the general supervising is, reviewing, disciplining, directing, and all that could be put in 125, taking out some exceptions about the appointed officials. Maybe even say, define general supervisor based on references of chapter 125, which is your HR code. They solve some of that. But when you talk about generally supervising, what are the pieces does that mean? So it's everything from board to leaving and everything in between. So there may be opportunity to.
Okay, we did update this last year, but I think it was just the language, prior to